and Craig Smoke.
Mark Zeigler, sports writer for the San Diego Union-Tribune, covers basketball and more, joins us on 365 Sports. Mark, obviously, if anyone thought San Diego State was a one-time deal, they've learned differently, but they've been more than just a one-time deal. They're really good. Your thoughts about how would you rate what they've done so far this year compared to at this time last year?
I think this is a little bit more impressive, to be honest. I mean, that was an impressive run to the national championship game, but that team was loaded. They were 9 deep. They had rim protection. They had, 4 legitimate bruising big men. This year, they really only have 1. What they've done just to get to the Sweet 16 this year after the kind of up and down season they've had, I think is the most impressive part. I mean, they've lost 10 games. They couldn't win away from home. They just struggled late in games. They couldn't shoot, and they just all put it together last weekend in Spokane, and here they are.
Mark, this is a rematch, obviously. How much of a chip on their shoulder do they have about that and taking on this Connecticut team that most of the world thinks nobody can beat?
Yeah, what's interesting about it is if you go in their locker room, there's not one guy who's intimidated by UConn. I mean, it's a crazy thing, and I'm sure Dan Hurley's sitting there on the other side going, man, I don't want to play these guys again. Because they played them. They played them in the national championship game. And if you remember that game, UConn controlled almost that entire game, and there was 5 minutes to go. All of a sudden, San Diego State snuck back into it, and they were down 5. And UConn hadn't been in that position the entire tournament. They had not had a close game, and they had to prove themselves, and they did, to their credit, and earn their national championship. But because of that experience, there's 4 guys who played in that game, played major minutes in that game that are back. And they just look at UConn like, yeah, we can play with these guys. And, the fact that it's in Boston and it'll be a pretty partisan crowd for UConn doesn't faze them at all. They played at BYU this year. They played at Gonzaga. They played it in the pit. At altitude in New Mexico was sold out. I mean, they had like 7 or 8 road games this year where they were sold out in crazy environments. So they're not going to be phased at all. They're not going to be intimidated. They're not going to be scared. So I think, and they want another, like any competitor, they want another shot at them. And it's rare in sports that you get it, and they just did.
Mark, what are the most notable differences from this year's team in comparison? Not to always want to compare to last year, but what's the most notable difference for maybe some people who haven't seen San Diego State since that game?
So, they lost those 5 players, and the most notable difference is they lost Nathan Mensah, who was the 6'10" shot blocker who spent a lot of time this year with the Charlotte Hornets, drawing charges and blocking shots, and just not having that kind of rim protection inside has made him a little bit differently defensively. A lot of people didn't think they'd be as good defensively, but better offensively because they had more offensive pieces. And guess what happened? They were actually the exact same team. They were ranked 8th nationally, or 9th actually right now, in defensive efficiency, and their offense has struggled. So they're kind of the same team in that regard, just not as big and long. But they have some good offensive pieces that if they get going can be really lethal. And Yale found that out. I mean, they made 13 threes. They couldn't miss a 3 all of a sudden. And they just kind of had that glint in their eye when they get into March, and I think that's another similarity. But they're certainly not as on paper as good or as deep a team as last year, even though they play 9 guys. Despite like me saying they're not going to be afraid, doesn't mean they're going to beat UConn. UConn's really, really good, and it's going to take a perfect game for them to win.
So that's in Boston. San Diego's not very close to Boston. UConn is, and then we've already had a Dave Borges who covers UConn on, and we've had John Fanta, among others, on, national guys too, about the crowd there. How much of a grueling part will that be to be on the other side of the country?
Yeah, I think it's going to be more of a factor than they want to admit. I mean, here's what their schedule is like. They had to sort of plan what they were going to do in Spokane. I flew straight from Spokane to Boston because I looked at the schedule and said, why am I going home? I'm just going to get right back on a plane across the country. Spokane's not that close to San Diego. People might think, well, it's all on the West Coast in the Pacific time zone. It's 1,000 miles from San Diego. It's a 2.5-hour flight. And they decided to go home not knowing what the game time would be Sunday in Spokane. Well, they got the late game. They didn't get on a plane until after 1 a.m. and got home in their beds at 4 a.m. Monday morning, woke up, had a practice in the afternoon, and then Tuesday morning woke up early, practiced, and got on a plane back out here. and then they get here and they get handed the first practice at TD Garden at 10 a.m., which is 7 a.m. on their body clocks. So they're waking up at 5 a.m. on their body clocks. So I think it's going to be a factor. But, last year you look at that team, they got shipped to Orlando in the first weekend, and then they came home, and then they went to Louisville, and they came home, and they went to Houston. So if anybody can do it, and they're a mentally tough team, it's them. But it has to be a factor when you consider that the team they're playing just bust to New York and then bust 90 minutes from their campus here, and is going to have a home crowd behind them.
If they do win the game, what will be the reason why?
They hit shots. They're going to have to hit a bunch of threes. Again, they're capable of it. They've showed it, but they just haven't done it very often. But if they get, again, like I said, they get that little glint in their eye in March and something happens to them and they just kind of turn it on and they start making shots, they can hang around the game. I think it's going to be, and I'm writing a story about this right now. Last year, they got it to 5. And Jordan Hawkins, you might remember, hit an incredible three-pointer right over Lamont Butler. They defended it pretty well, made that 3, and that was the game. But they want to get him in that situation. I don't think they necessarily have to lead this game early. I don't think it's one of the things they're going to get to a great start. I think the best plan is actually to be behind by 10 or 12 almost the entire game, make a spurt with, inside 8 minutes to go and get to that last media timeout, within 2 possessions. And then see what happens to UConn. That home crowd can turn on you. They start getting uneasy, start thinking about how much money they paid for Sunday tickets. Tickets here are going, the get-in price tomorrow is like $700. So fans start getting uneasy, and you start getting a little, you hear those groans and an anxious kind of feeling in the arena. That can turn on a team. And so I think that's the plan, is to see if they can keep it close and get into those last few minutes and then just see what happens.
Sometimes the bracket falls your way, and then, of course, there's sometimes that you interrupt all of that when playing the number 1 team in UConn. But they did get Yale with their shocking win in round 1, and then they took care of them very easily. UAB, that's a 12 and a 5. I looked at their losses. They have maybe a couple that were burps, but BYU's a tournament team. New Mexico a couple of times a tournament team. Obviously, Grand Canyon a tournament team. Colorado State a tournament team. So they've played good people. That conference does have really good basketball. How much does that prep them?
Oh, 100%. Look, whatever they face in TD Garden is not going to be harder than what they faced, and it'll be easier, in fact, than what they faced in the Mountain West. Because one player said to me, he said, look, yeah, it's going to be a big crowd for them and a home field for them, but there's no altitude. We can see the water right out the window. And we're used to doing this at 5,000 feet, at 7,000 feet from a sea level team. That's really hard. And you've got to be 10 or 15 points better just because of the altitude. So you have to worry about that. So I think that really helps them. And you're right. The losses they've had have been, they've all been close. In every one of their losses, 10 losses this year, it's an incredible stat. They either led in the second half or were within 1 point. And they just did make some plays down the stretch, and that's something they struggled with. And the other thing to remember is this bracket is set up exactly the same as last season. They played a 12. They were a 5 seed. They played a 12, struggled in the first game, got that out of the way, exhaled, came out in the second game, got lucky with an upset of a 13-4, blew out the 13, and then guess who they got in the third game? The number 1 overall seed. Last year it was Alabama and Louisville, a few hours from campus, and they won that game, and no one thought they would. So I think, look, are they going to win them all? Almost certainly they're not. But would you doubt these guys after seeing what happened last year? I wouldn't.
So I got a question, Mark, on San Diego State. They've had a history with their basketball program. We even know their history in football, too, and I'm going to get that in a moment. How much does basketball mean to that town and to that university?
That's a great question. I'm glad you asked it because, most of these big basketball programs are in small towns, small college towns. San Diego is a major metropolitan area, but it's really embraced college basketball because there is no NBA team. We have no NHL team in the winter. We no longer have an NFL team. And the one team that's left is a spring-summer sport, and that's the Padres. And people root for the Padres, but as we all know, they don't have exactly a winning tradition. And so people are a little bit wary. This is the one team that people feel safe cheering for and get invested emotionally because they usually don't let them down. They win a lot of games. They almost never lose at home. They win a lot of titles, and now they're starting to win the NCAA tournament. So it's huge in that city. I mean, it is absolutely enormous. I mean, the stories I heard from people who watched Lamont Butler's shot against FAU last year in bars, I mean, hugging strangers and beer flying around. I mean, it was crazy. It was like, V-Day type celebrations. And it's because we don't win anything in San Diego. Teams don't win except for indoor soccer titles, and people are really hungry. So, yeah, it's a big, big deal. Not so much the football program, the football team, because there's a glass ceiling on mid-major football, group of 5 football. But in basketball, the beauty is you can play against the big boys and you can beat the big boys, and they do.
All right, football question. I looked at their schedule, obviously, with what happened. And we had you on before, Mark, about all the unknown, the speculation about the Pac-12, and as it was breaking up and eventually now down to 2 with Washington State, Oregon State. And the Aztecs play both of them because those 2 schools needed people and obviously wanted to be a part of that conference as much as they could be while still being the Pac-12, too. How much do having those type of schools on the schedule and how all that worked out, is everybody pretty happy with it?
Yeah, what's interesting is, so the deal is that the 2 schools, Oregon State and Washington State, would play, get 6 games or 5 games each from the conference, and you'd usually play one or the other. So this year, San Diego State got Oregon State. Well, it turned out they'd also already previously scheduled Washington State in a non-conference game, so they kept that, and they're going to get them both. And so I think that's a big deal because it kind of helps legitimize the schedule, and getting them at home too. So it's good for the stadium. They really struggle to sell tickets in that stadium. They overprice the tickets. And again, like I said, it's people sense that glass ceiling on football, and so they're a little bit reluctant to pay and go to the games. And so I think this helps a little bit, particularly if they can get some wins. Now, they got a new coach, Sean Lewis. They're going to have a whole new offense, a whole new philosophy. They're not going to be the grinded out, play defense and win tight games type team that just doesn't turn it over and doesn't beat themselves. They're going to air it out like maybe no team in the country. And the defense probably isn't going to be very good because they lost a lot of pieces in the transfer portal. And so they're going to be a different type of team, and we'll see how quickly he can turn it there. It might be a little bit of a rough season next year, not like a 3-9 rough, but maybe a 6-6 type season. And then I think in future years, once he gets his feet under him, they'll be a little bit better and improved and maybe kind of capture the imagination of the fan base.
And the Sean Lewis thing was weird how that ended at Colorado. It's like all of a sudden they were rolling, they had that great start, and my God, they were the talk of college football, then all the breaks hit. And then all of a sudden he kind of went sideways there as far as with Dion's staff. How much was he accepted when that was the name to become the head coach at San Diego State? Because he's got a very nice resume.
Yeah, and I think what was accepted is that people really, how fans are. They want to be entertained. They say, we got to be entertained. And, San Diego State was not a very exciting team, but they won a lot. I mean, Brady Hoke a few years ago won 12 games. But it wasn't an exciting brand of football. So it's like, well, do you want exciting in 6-6, or do you want boring in 12-2? I mean, take your pick. They're going to try to get both, obviously, with him. Yeah, it was a weird deal. And I think he's going to have some of the same issues he had at Colorado at San Diego, in that they had no offensive line, and San Diego State's entire offensive line went in the portal. Part of that is it's a different type of offensive lineman that plays in his quicker system, where San Diego State was just going to pound the ball down your throat. Those guys typically don't want to play in a system where you're going to have 90 plays a game. But I think there'll be a little bit of adjustment. I think people need to be patient. He might get some pieces right. He might get the receiving core right this year, but not the offensive line. The same with, the defensive line might struggle too. But as he gets pieces and gets his vision together, I think he has a chance to succeed and be entertaining. And that's kind of what they're looking for.
When was the last time you played Torrey Pines?
Well, I had a chance to play it a couple of months ago in a media day ahead of the Farmers Insurance Open. And I had a pass. It was a rainy day, and I'm glad I did because I heard it was a 6-hour round and the rough was brutal.
Oh, yeah.
And the guys who played hated golf by the 15th hole. So trust me, that's not the first time that's happened at Torrey Pines.
Yeah, no, playing Torrey Pines before a PGA event or the U.S. Open can make you not love golf at all very quickly. I got a chance to play it after the 96 Super Bowl. That was the one when Elway beat the Packers and Favre. And
I remember it.
my flight the next morning was canceled. And so I just called out there, just on a whim, had all day. And they said, yeah, come out. You're probably not going to get on, maybe. And I got on pretty quickly, and that was just a thrill, man. That is just, what a beautiful, just the scenery off those early front 9 holes, I think, when you have the ocean and the cliffs and just, oh, my Lord, Mark, that's gorgeous. That's God right there. Yeah, yeah.
It is. It's a great place to play. And, and it's funny because every time I go out there, I take a picture from one of the signature holes of the ocean and, La Jolla in the background, the waves crashing below. And I'll send it to friends on the East Coast. They said, yeah, I'm just playing our Muni today.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Thanks for your time. Have fun. Good luck to San Diego State, UConn in the Sweet 16. Mark Zeigler, again, good stuff from the San Diego Union-Tribune.
Yeah, I know.